which makes me sometimes an extrovert. Right? I like to be out. I like to socialize. I get energy from people. So thank you guys for your energy tonight. Thank you. Now I have a question for you guys, all right? How many introverts are in the audience? Yeah, that's a loud introvert right there. I like you. I'm always attracted to the introverts.
Well, good afternoon, everyone who's tuned in for another live broadcast from the Duncan Showroom, today being storytelling. Something that we started long before, well, just before COVID. Then COVID came along, kind of put us on the hiatus for a while, but Lee and I decided we would continue as often as we could right afterwards. As a matter of fact, we've been going monthly since January this year, and we've also included July this year, where we'll be doing a storytelling on the fourth Sunday at 2 o'clock at the 39 days of July. So everybody gets the idea and understands what storytelling is all about. It's not just telling a little fib. There's a whole line of... Did I say fib? Lots of things lots of good stories that could possibly have been true. But there's a whole new wave coming back again for storytelling. I know that Jenny down in Shawnigan Lake just had a thing this weekend, Friday and Saturday. It was great, and she couldn't make it this afternoon, but she's going to watch tonight. That's another thing that we can do, because it's archived. You can watch it forever. Now, one of the things I just want to let you know as we're going along is that this year I'm going to be celebrating my 25th annual 50th birthday, which means I'll be 74 years old. And now that I'm in my 70s, I've learned a whole bunch of neat things. Like if I don't want to see someone, I can just walk away and pretend I can't see. If I don't want to listen to someone, I can just walk away and pretend that my hearing's gone. But one of the things I've discovered that I really enjoy the most, and I'm wondering why it took me so long to get to here, was how much fun it is and how enjoyable it is to put warm underwear on fresh out of the dryer. And you know what's even more exciting is looking around the laundromat trying to figure out who it belongs to. That's part of getting old. You can do stuff like that and get away with it, right? Anyway, the showroom's been open for 20 years for those that are here for the very first time. I know some of you are. These are our Fred Astaire's. Walk on them gingerly, please. We have all our ducks in a row. The washrooms are off to the back. We do have an intermission today again, don't we, Lee? That's because the stories take up about 2 hours when it's all said and done, with a little break in between. So without further ado, representing, you're from Victoria or Parksville? Victoria. You're the Victoria sector. She gets in touch with the people from Parksville and from Qualicum, Nanaimo, and all the different ones that are going up and down the island. I hear there's going to be one starting in the Cowichan Valley soon, we hope. But the instigator for me is this lady here, Lee Porteous. Give it up for her, please.
I'm actually more of a pest, I think, because, of course, there's other people behind this, too. I'd shout out to Marva Blackmore, who is, in my view, one of the uppitiest ladies that I know. And Laurie Giffen, who is the representative for your area down here in Duncan, because she lives in Cowichan Bay. So if you have any interest in a workshop or telling stories or even more about stories, she's the one to talk to during the break. So we're here. My name is Lee Porteous, as you heard. On behalf of the storytellers on Vancouver Island, we want to express our gratitude to Longevity John for the opportunity to tell stories here in this wonderful theater. You've heard me say before, if you've listened before, it's my favorite place to tell. He created, and to Ted Cadillac for making us heard and seen so well. We encourage you to make a donation to keep the showroom open and the stories happening here. This is one of the series of storytellers events each month through to and including June of this year. Your storytellers will be from the 3 adult storytelling groups on the island, the Victoria Storytellers Guild, the Around Town Tellers from Nanaimo, and the Mid-Island Storytellers from Parksville, Qualicum Beach. We acknowledge with respect the Cowichan First Nation, the largest single First Nation in BC, on whose traditional territory this event is taking place, and whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Welcome to all of you who are or will be joining us online, and those who are here today. For those of you who are here with us, please mute your phones. You will have a chance to check them during our mid-show break and also chat with the tellers, Ted and Longevity John, and each other. Our theme today is Uppity Women. We are sure you know some and perhaps have been described as one. not always as a compliment, but you should take it as a compliment. I'm happy to join you in meeting some more of them this afternoon. Our first teller is Jennifer Ferris, and she encountered stories in high school when the ancient myths were part of her courses. She's been telling stories of all kinds and helping others to learn and supporting storytelling on a local and national level for more than 30 years. So she has a whole collection of uppity women that she can tell us about, and here's the first one.
Thank you, Lee. Lovely to be here. But as you know, a woman's place is in the home, making sure that her family are comfortable, healthy, and happy. A supporter and credit to her husband. She should be modest, virtuous, and refined. In Victorian Victoria, and all up and down the island and through the province and all around the English-speaking world, a lady must wear heavy, uncomfortable clothing that pulls on her waist, her abdomen, her lungs, a corset made of whale bone, and restricting her body so much that she can barely breathe. But it's all right, because on a Sunday, she can walk out on her husband's arm and people will look and say, now there is a man who can keep his wife in just the way she should be. A lady that does not indulge in manual labor in her house. Well, how could she? Her clothing would not allow. My great-great-aunt, Mary Jane Pidwell, was born at this time. She was part of that world. She and her family came to Victoria in 1858. There was a big crowd of them, parents, 2 older brothers, 4 older sisters, and Mary Jane. Oh, and an unmarried aunt to help in the house. They had been caught up in that clarion call of gold that had gone around the world because that precious metal had been found on the sandbars in the Fraser River. Now, the Pidwells were a merchant family, so they opened a dry goods store at the corner of Douglas and Yates in Victoria. And they moved into a house on Humboldt Street, close to the harbour. Mr. Pidwell and his sons worked at the store. The girls stayed at home with their mother and the maiden aunt, and they learned how to run a household, how to do light household tasks like dusting or rearranging some ornaments on a shelf. They might do a little painting with watercolors. They might embroider or crochet, play the pianoforte, and they would sing. The 5 sisters, Louisa, Minerva, Fanny, my great-grandmother, Jessie, and Mary Jane, sang beautifully and harmonized as only loving sisters could. Musical evenings were organized at that house on Humboldt, and there was a reason for this. Of course, the audience contained friends and relatives, but they had a list of eligible bachelors, and a few were chosen each time. Each girl fulfilled her ambition of becoming a wife and mother, each daughter being married one after another. The last, Mary Jane, she became a bride in 1863, and her groom was W.D. Higgins, David William Higgins, although he liked to be called D.W. He was the editor of the Colonist newspaper. He owned an electric company. He opened the first theatre in Victoria, and he was interested in politics. It wasn't long before he was elected to the legislature, and in the 1890s, he was Speaker of the House. Mary Jane settled into married life. She ran her home with a light but firm hand. She gave birth to at least 6 children, 4 of whom survived to adulthood. In the afternoon, she would pay calls upon friends and neighbours, and she did a little volunteer work. She and a group of people opened the first maternity hospital in Victoria where women and their babies could receive care free of charge. And for the most part, her husband, D.W., well, he was in favour of everything that she did outside the home, as long as it did not impinge on what happened inside the home. However, Mary Jane had some friends that Higgins was not sure about, did not really approve of. Mary Jane joined the Women's Christian Temperance Society. Now, I know what you're thinking. A bunch of prissy, mealy-mouthed killjoys. Who doesn't enjoy a drink or two? But in the second half of the 19th century, BC had the highest consumption of alcohol per capita in the whole Dominion of Canada. Wives and mothers would wait at home on payday, hoping for that envelope filled with money that would pay the rent, put food on the table. But they would welcome home a man drunk and belligerent who might pass on to them a disease that must not be mentioned in private or in public, certainly not in anyone's drawing room. And so the Women's Christian Temperance Society went about the business of cleansing Victoria from the evils of drink, but they were also interested in something else. They knew that things had to change. And if you want to make changes, you have to have a seat at the table. And if you want a female legislator in the legislative building in Victoria, then women had to have the vote. So the society she already belonged to also formed the Victoria Council of Women, whose really sole aim was to get the Electoral Act changed so that women would be admitted into the government. They had some success. They persuaded the Victoria Council to allow women to vote in municipal and school board elections in the early 1890s. And they struggled to persuade the legislature to consider votes for women in a provincial election. The parties, whether they were in power or in opposition, were not the least bit interested. And so the women approached individual MLAs to introduce private members' bill that might be adopted and accepted. Each one was defeated. In 1897, a petition was presented at the legislature. A very popular young politician called Harry Helmken stood in the legislature to speak. His desk was covered with garlands of flowers. He had a large boutonniere on his jacket, all provided by the ladies sitting in the gallery. He rose. "Mr. Speaker, I crave leave to introduce a petition, the aim of which is to right the great wrong that has been inflicted upon our wives, our sisters, and our daughters." And he went on to name a number of injustices. There was cheering from the gallery. Mr. Speaker called for silence. "This is not a tea party. Any more noise, and the gallery will be cleared." And as he scanned the faces in the gallery, he recognized one of them, his wife. Perhaps he should not have let her get herself involved in activities outside the home. There would be words later that day. But now Mr. Helmken was standing and was allowed to proceed. "I hold in my hand a petition signed by 2,500 people, 500 of those residents of Victoria, a petition that calls upon this legislature to allow women to vote." Now, the members of the legislature, none of whom were in favour of votes for women, particularly Mr. Speaker, who was vehemently against, those in the seats there that day, they didn't mind the presentation of this petition because it added a little levity and diversion to an otherwise rather boring afternoon. Again, Mr. Helmken spoke. "I hold in my hand a petition," and he began to read the petition, and I won't quote it word for word. It's in rather rather difficult language, but it goes something like this. Whereas the population of the province of British Columbia is divided almost equally between men and women, whereas women have the intellectual and mental capacity equal to that of men, sniggering all around, whereas no evil seemed to have arisen from giving women the right to vote in municipal and school board elections, whereas this is the year of Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, and would it not be a great compliment to her that we in Victoria, a city named for her, that we would grant the right to women to vote in elections? Much guffawing in the House and a poisonous look from Mr. Speaker. But still, Harry kept his place and persevered. He held up the petition, unrolling it, just enough for them to see the first signatures. I would like to draw attention to the fact that the first signature on this petition is none other than that of Mrs. D.W. Higgins, a lady that we both respect and revere. The private member's bill and the presentation of the petition was defeated. Now, there's no record of what was said at the dinner table that night in Mr. Higgins' house, but it was obvious to everyone that although there was only one speaker in the legislature, there were obviously two clear voices heard at the house at the corner of St. Charles and Fort Street. Unfortunately, my great-great-aunt only lived for 3 more years and died in 1900. She did not bear witness to the many other petitions, 19 in all, that were presented to the legislature. She did not witness the attempt in 1903 to take the right to vote, the women's right to vote in municipal and school board elections, away from them. It failed. She was not witness to the Council of Women, a group of people that she had joined in the 1890s. The Victoria Council of Women sent a letter to Ottawa demanding the government give the right of women to vote in federal elections. This was 2 full years before the National Council of Women made the same demand. She did not witness the election of 1916, when the provincial premier, Harlan Brewster, called an election, and in that election there was a referendum to change the Electoral Act to allow women, now when I say women, I mean white women of British descent, these women to vote. Yea or nay? 65.8% of the voters, men of course, indicated yes. The following year, 1917, there was a by-election in Vancouver. The winner was Mary Ann Smith. The election was in the April of the year. And had my great-great-aunt been alive, she would have sighed with relief and cheered with joy. However, her husband, he was still around. He died on December the 1st, his birthday, 1917. And one does wonder, did the thought of a woman sitting in the legislature somehow contribute to his demise? What makes an uppity woman? Is she born, or is she formed by circumstance? I think that Mary Jane Pidwell Higgins demonstrated that actions speak louder than words, and, for all intents and purposes, have nothing to do with appearance. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. We can see where the DNA goes down generations, right? Our next teller is Laurie Giffen, and I mentioned before that she is our local representative, you might say, and she's a member of the Victoria Storytellers Guild and lives in Cobble Hill. So she has crafted this story from a story that exists in most cultures and which you already know, weaving it into her own family's history. A unique approach, I think you'll see.
Thank you, Lee. It started in August of 1918. Freeman Dunlop had been in Europe for over a year. He had arrived in time for Hill 70 and the mustard gas. And then it was a long march into Belgium to a place called Passchendaele. He went over the top at Passchendaele with another gunner. They were machine gunners and their officer, and they were meant to rendezvous with a group of infantry. And the infantry didn't show, so the captain went off to look for the infantry and see what was up, and left the gunners with orders to hold their position. The Germans found them before the infantry did. And so you can picture these two men who've never met before, shoulder to shoulder, taking cover behind an inadequate rock. Freeman described the feeling of the bullets pounding on his helmet, shredding his pack, his life saved by a ruined canteen again and again and again. Either one of those men could have survived or been a little safer if they had pushed the other one aside, but neither one did. And relief came. That unit was one of the only ones in the war to achieve their objective, and so they all won medals for that, but not for surviving the point that he remembered most clearly. He spent the winter on Vimy Ridge, where the Allies were trying to hold the territory that had been so dearly won. The war diaries give account for the thousands of rounds that were used in the barrages at night. And the officers wrote about the chalk in soil that the trenches were dug in, which absorbed water when it rained and then collapsed. Whenever they froze, they would expand and collapse, burying the men in a slurry of frozen mud. And that was Freeman's winter. By August of 1918, he had been promoted, and he was a corporal now, but he was still on his knees and elbows in the mud of a farmer's field. This one had been taped off, and they were drilling and preparing for a battle that you and I would call Amiens. And we would know that he was getting ready for the last push and that the war would end in 3 months, but he had no way of knowing that. On August 18th, 1918, in that field, he must have thought that this was a war that was never going to end. On that day, in August of 18th, 1918, Amelia's war was just beginning. She was 11, and she was back in Nova Scotia. She was 11 the day that the Baptist neighbor, complained to her father that her stepmother had been seen drinking up the railway tracks with another man. The neighbor was focused on the drinking, but you can understand all the reasons why Amelia's father was not a happy man when he got home that day. Amelia brought her siblings, her younger brother and sister, out into the yard so they wouldn't have to hear all the yelling. But nothing could protect those children from the sound of the gunshot. It was so loud. Neighbors came running, and that was how Amelia found out that her beloved father was dead. The stepmother swore that it was an accident. She said that he'd been cleaning his gun. Now, Amelia knew that you don't clean your gun when you're in the middle of a shouting match with your spouse. But she couldn't get a word in edgewise in all the fuss. She was only 11. And the next day, she found herself on a ferry on her way to Boston, where she was going to work as a maid. Now, there was no such thing as children's aid in those days. But there was truancy officers, and there was a long-standing law in Massachusetts that children had to be 16 before they could leave school. And because of that law, Amelia wasn't allowed to step outside while she was in Boston or put her face to a window. When she wasn't actually working, she was allowed to go in the space under the stairs where she had a blanket and a Bible to comfort her. And you can imagine how well she knew the Bible after a while in there. So this is pretty grim. It's a good time to introduce you to the fairy godmother. And she was Amelia's grandmother, who buried her son and then went looking for her missing grandchildren. She took a train to Halifax and pounded the desk with officials because these children, at least the two who were old enough, were not registered or attending school. And when that didn't get attention fast enough for her, she went back home and she rallied the church ladies. They found Lulu first. I don't know where they found Lulu. She was only 3 and she had no memory of it, so she couldn't tell. But Tommy, he was 8, and he could remember that he had been left with strangers where he was allowed to live in the barn until he was old enough to earn his keep. Very happy to see their grandmother, these children were. But they weren't allowed to stay with her because the authorities had found their mother, Amelia's stepmother, was their full mother. She was married to a new husband and living in the next county by then. And the authorities decided that a woman couldn't just dump her children on strangers like that. She had an obligation to raise them and take care of them. And so their children were made to go back to their birth mother. And the grandmother, all she could do was hope that some of the money she sent didn't go to drink. And she never gave up her search for Amelia. 4 years after Amelia arrived in Boston, the truancy officer came knocking at the door asking about a child who wasn't registered in school. And the next day, Amelia found herself on a ferry on her way back to Nova Scotia. And in her pocket, she had a train ticket that would take her all the way to the town where her stepmother lived. But Amelia was 15 by now, and she decided that that was old enough to make some decisions for herself. She started to get uppity. So Amelia didn't take the train all the way to her stepmother's house. She got off in Argyll and walked up the long, winding road along the Tusket River to the house where her grandmother lived. And they had a joyful reunion. Amelia was welcome to stay with her grandmother. But she was worried about Lulu and Tommy, and there was nothing that anybody could tell her that reassured her. She knew that her father would want her to do something to help them. And she was feeling a little bit uppity. So she put together a plan, and with the help of her grandmother and the church ladies, when she had things organized, she used the rest of that train ticket and went to her stepmother's house to strike a bargain, 15 years old. She asked her stepmother to sign a piece of paper saying she was 18, old enough to have finished school and have a year or two under her belt of experience under her belt as a maid in Boston. And she wanted to use that letter to get a job as a maid at the big house that was nearby. And in exchange for her stepmother's signature on that letter, she promised that a portion of her wages would go to supporting Lulu and Tommy. And of course, the stepmother was already missing the wages from Boston, and she signed without blinking. She thought she was getting more cash. So that's what Amelia did. Now, she loved her job at the Robertson House. They treated her well. She had every Sunday off. And when she wasn't working, she was allowed to do as she pleased. She had a bedroom to herself. It was a nice setup for her. On Sundays, she pleased to go to church. You see, she'd already shown the church ladies how well she knew the Bible and got herself a second job as a Sunday school teacher. And so on Sundays, she would get a ride into town where her stepmother lived, near the church. And she would pick up Lulu and Tommy. Who could object to her taking her siblings to church for Sunday school? So that's how the children got reacquainted, was at Sunday school. And after the service, they would hang out in the churchyard until Amelia's ride was ready to go back to the Robertson house. They would have lunch, they would be visiting. It would be sometime probably mid-afternoon before they were ready to go back. And that gave the children time to get acquainted, right? It gave Amelia time to teach Lulu how to brush her own hair, Tommy how to tie his own shoelaces, and to find out what it was that they needed most. Was it warm clothes? Was it food? What was it that they needed? And the next week, that's what she brought. Late in life, when Amelia told me a part of this story, she said she was very proud because she fulfilled her side of the bargain with her stepmother to the letter, but she never handed over any cash. Now, Freeman was home from war, of course, for a long time. He never darkened the door of a church after he got back from the war. But his mother was one of the church ladies, and his family lived nearby. And so he would spend his Sunday afternoons doing maintenance in the churchyard. So he had plenty of time to see what was going on. He had already noticed these poor, neglected children, and he was amazed to see how they came to life in the presence of their older sister. And he decided that she was some kind of hero. But every time he tried to strike up a conversation with her, she brushed him off. Amelia had way too much on her mind for socializing. What was needed was a fairy godmother and maybe a glass slipper. It happened at Easter. Amelia had the whole weekend off. And she didn't have enough money for the train, but the stagecoach was still running, right? We're in 1923 now. And so she was able to take the stagecoach to her grandmother's house and spend Easter with her father's family. And she had a joyful reunion. She saw aunts and uncles and cousins that she hadn't seen since her father died. To make things even better, her grandmother gave her a gift. She gave her an Easter dress and a new outfit, right? It was a sort of a practice in those days, but grandmother also knew that Amelia would need it, right? And she picked a beautiful outfit. It was stylish. It had a dropped waist and a narrow skirt, little jacket, cloche hat. And with it came silk stockings and black patent leather shoes that shone like glass. Amelia loved her new outfit, and she felt different when she wore it. She really liked the way people at church reacted to her when she was wearing it at the service that Sunday. She liked it so much that she decided that she was going to wear it on the trip back to the Robertson house. And it wasn't a problem because she didn't have to walk that long, dusty road. Her Uncle Wilson hitched the ox to the cart and drove her there. And that was a special moment because her Uncle Wilson had been her father's favorite brother and her favorite uncle, but he'd gone away to war before her father died. She hadn't seen him for years. And all that weekend with all the people, he hadn't said a thing to anybody. And so this was a private moment for Amelia to get caught up with her uncle. And he was prepared for it too. He had a couple of things he wanted to talk to her about. So they had a good chat. She asked him about the war, and he told her about some of his experiences. He told her, for example, about the time that he and another gunner were trapped behind an inadequate rock when the Germans were firing at them, and what it felt like to have the bullets hammering on your helmet, shredding your pack, your life saved by a ruined canteen again and again and again. And Amelia was very taken by that story, but he wasn't done. He said, that other fella, he said, I think he lives near you, right, if you're at the Robertson house. Have you heard of Freeman Dunlop in your travels? And she said, no, I don't think I've heard the name. He said, well, if you hear the name, look him up for me and give him my regards, because that man's a hero. So Amelia agreed to do that. It was the polite thing to do, filed it away, and went on with her journey. She got from the cart into the stagecoach at the right time, and off they went. And she very quickly realized she'd made a mistake by wearing her new outfit on this journey, because no sooner did the stagecoach take off and the rain started to fall, and it was pouring, and the mud on the road started to get thick, right? And it held up the wheels of the stagecoach, and they were late, and it was dark, and it was wet, muddy, axle-deep mud in the stagecoach yard by the time they arrived at her stop. And Amelia, all she could think of was that she was going to ruin her shoes and her delicate silk stockings by stepping down into the mess of that yard. To make matters worse, as she started to descend the coach, one of the buckles on her shoe got caught on the hinge of the door and came off, and the shoe came off her foot and landed upside down in the mud. And that was it. Everything was ruined as far as she was concerned. But there was a man who appeared at her elbow, and he helped her out of the coach, he rescued her shoe, and he got her into the stagecoach inn without ever getting her feet wet. And when she got into the inn, she recognized the woman that was there, and she was one of the church ladies where she'd been teaching Sunday school. And so she was allowed to go into the other room and change into her practical clothes so that she could have the long walk through the rain to the Robertson house without ruining her outfit. And when she was finished getting dressed, she came out into the inn and was getting ready to leave, and she noticed that her shoe was already fixed and clean and sitting on the table waiting for her. And the man who had helped her appeared in the doorway with his slicker on, wet from the rain. And he said he'd just hitched the ox to the cart, and he was waiting to drive her back to the Robertson house when she was ready. So here she is, 15 years old. This is a stranger. It's dark. It's raining. She was a little uncertain, but the lady who was there was one of the church ladies, and she gave her an encouraging nod. And so Amelia said, okay, she said, but I wouldn't know how to thank you properly since I don't know your name. And he said, that's easy. He said, I'm Freeman Dunlop. And so she knew that this was the hero that her uncle had been talking about. They got married a year later. Lulu and Tommy came to live with them. The Stagecoach Inn was closed by then, but there was still plenty of room for people, and so they came to live with them. And as for the stepmother and her new husband, they took off to New York and went to the speakeasies, that they wanted to explore the speakeasies that everybody was talking about. And everybody in my Cinderella story lived happily ever after. Thank you.
See, you knew that story, didn't you? All we need is a slipper, and we know. So our next teller is Jewel Breeze, and she is, as she says, passionate about storytelling. She says her stories are told from personal life experiences, and that she has told stories at the Around Town Tellers in Nanaimo and missed the Slice of Life in Parksville. Jewel welcomes opportunities to share her stories and, as she says, hopefully entertain. I can tell you that Marva specifically asked Jewel to come and tell this story. So if it isn't entertaining, we know who to blame. It won't be me then.
Good afternoon. What a delight to be here.
Just let me get the microphone better for you.
Watch, Ginger. I can. Or you Fred Astaire. I don't want it in front of my face, though.
Well,
That-
it has to be to a point where else we can't, the broadcast, we won't be heard on the broadcast.
Okay, I
So
can
it's not
acquiesce.
about you, it's about the broadcast.
I can't be the uppity woman.
No. You can in your story.
I am in my story, okay. I'll start again. Good afternoon. What a delight to be here, and what an eclectic place. Wow. This is the more modern uppity woman. And yeah, so we will see. I'm still on a journey of self-discovery, which began about 2.5 years ago after the passing of my best friend. All through this, my motto has been, Jules, just go for it. And it was in that spirit that I traveled outside of our country for this past year. I took 2 trips. And one of the things that I learned was, I think I'm ready to have a companion to travel with, to have some adventures with. Well, the universe heard me, and she answered with a twist. It all began in a parking lot while I was waiting for my hiking group to appear. A random encounter with a stranger. Yes, he was good looking, bien fait, as the French might say, but it was more than that. There was a connection. It was a sense of having known him, maybe in some past life, I don't know. As our conversation ended, he asked me if he could give me his cell phone number and invited me to come on a few of the trails with him if I found the one that we were doing, an exciting one. I accepted his number and put it in my contact list. When I got home later that afternoon, I shared this experience with my best friend, Deanna, and she said, now, Jules, don't you be going in the bush with strange men. And I'm thinking, well, I haven't lost it all. I know better than that. It actually took me 4 months before I followed up and gave him a message saying, if you're still interested in showing me some of the trails, I'd be open to that. However, for my own comfort and safety, I think we should meet first for tea or coffee. Well, we did that. And following our tea, we walked along the ocean. Conversation flowed so easily, so smoothly. Lots to talk about. There are a lot of shared interests. And I shouldn't be surprised. We were both Geminis, it turned out. But all through that, there was a gentle feeling of energy that surrounded us. As time went on and we continued to explore trails, I realized that something special was happening and I wanted to explore it further. When he took me in his arms, I melted. A fire burned, and passionate kisses made me think, yeah, I want more. However, in order for more to become more, I had some thinking to do. If it came to being intimate, how was intimacy going to be? Safe, pleasurable, and of course, consensual. All those things were important to think about. And I was really quite aware that today, in the senior population especially, sexually transmittable infections are on the rise. So I had some research to do. I had been out of the dating game for an awfully long time, and I learned that condoms were latex, non-latex, ribbed, internal, flavored, colored, and some I heard even would glow in the dark. And I'm thinking, was that so they could find their way? They wouldn't get lost? I didn't know. And when it came to vaginal loops, well, they're water-soluble, silicone-based, and oil-based. Well, how on earth was I going to make any decisions? I knew for one thing, I was not about to go in my local pharmacy and peruse the aisles. I was sure that all eyes would be on me. However, I did hear from friends that the sex-positive store in Parksville was a wonderful place to go. And I lived in Qualicum, so I thought, I can do that. The afternoon I decided to go. I think the universe smiled on me again because it was just me and Emily who turned out to be working there that afternoon. I came up to her and I said, you know, my life might be getting a little more complicated, and I would like to get some information about how intimacy could be safe and pleasurable. She looks at me and smiles and leads me to a counter. Well, at that counter were all kinds of vaginal lubes. She said, you know, the water soluble would be the best. They're the most friendly for the vagina environment. And I thought, that sounds okay. And she said, would you like to try some samples? I'm looking at her and I'm thinking, how? Where? And she takes my hand and she begins to put some of the different samples on my hands, on my fingers. Well, there was one that felt very velvety, and I thought, oh, that feels nice, and it might work for friction. I'm going to put that in my preparedness bag. And the bonus of this was that it was a mother and daughter company in Victoria that was manufacturing or creating these loops. Next, we go over to where the condoms are. I had already decided that it was a non-latex condom because that was the most environmentally friendly one. And she said, that's probably a good choice. Then I noticed in the samples that there's the Skin brand, and I had read about it. It was #1, and it was also pleasurable for the wearer. And I thought, oh, that might be a good choice. However, there was a little bit of a hitch. They were low on samples. They only had extra large. I looked at her and I said, like, how does one know? And she said, in most cases, for the men it was average. But I'm thinking, and I'm sure I said out loud to her, you would think in this day of technology, there would be a one-size-fits-all condom. That's not the way it was. But she said to me, you know, any of the drugstores, the pharmacies, have that brand. And I knew then I could walk into one of those pharmacies and buy that particular brand, and you know where that went. Well, then we talked a little bit more, and I said, is there anything else that you can suggest? And she says to me, well, we have a game here. It's called Let's Connect. And it was also called Fan the Flame Higher. And the idea was it was led to conversation about intimacy. And each degree of card, the questions were a little different. And I thought, that might be fun. Might be a conversation starter, if necessary. So that also went in my preparedness bag. And as I was leaving, I kind of looked over and I saw, oh, there's a lot of sex toys there. And I kind of smiled at her and I said, you know, if there's anything else that I think I need, rest assured I'm coming back. I walked out of that store with a nice skip, thinking, what an experience. Well, about 3 days later, my friend phoned, and we had what I would call a very warm, fuzzy conversation. It ended with both of us agreeing that he would come over on Sunday, and we'd go for a walk, and then we would decide what we wanted to do. Well, Sunday came, Sunday went. He didn't show. No phone call. Not even a text. And I started to wonder, was everything okay for him? Did something happen? And that changed to that feeling of hollowness, like, this doesn't feel very good. I sat with that feeling that evening, and I began to think about, some of the things that had happened during the times that we were going out. And he didn't always show up, when he said. And I'm thinking, hey, Jules, is that a red flag? But I didn't want to go there. The next day, I phoned my friend Janice, and I explained, and she said, hey, Jules, I think you've been ghosted. And I said to her, ghosted? What the heck do you mean? And she said, well, that happens when someone in a relationship just disappears completely. No excuse, nothing, and you don't hear from them. And I thought, well, how cruel, how callous is that? And what a way to break trust. And I also thought that the only person that would know the reason for that was my friend himself. 4 or 5 weeks passed, and once in a while I caught myself thinking about the relationship that I'd hoped to explore further, and I thought of it as a comet blazing across the sky. I've since learned to dance in the rain, and I do have my preparedness bag. And I need to tell you, there is a sequel, but that's another story.
My gosh, I didn't expect it to be so educational today. Anyway, so we have volume 2 of that. I was thinking to myself, it's too bad that when we were of an age that we didn't have those kind of preparedness kits or anybody to ask. Or maybe it's as well. Anyway, so we've come to the time for our break, but I have some announcements. This is traditional. In any storytelling event that you will come to, you'll be told about what's coming up next. And so April 12th at 7:30 is the Around Town Tellers, and their theme is Hidden History. You would see me there if you come, and you can go online or in person for them. If you want any more information, let me know. But you can always find them on the webpage too. Probably just Storytelling Nanaimo would get you there. On April 15th is the Victoria Storytellers Guild, and that's at 7:30 in Victoria. Once again, you can let me know. Check online. I can give you more detail if you want. I brought cards. People were quite impressed. I still have some. So, and then on April 26th, which is a Friday, at the Mac in Parksville, and on Saturday, the next day at Fern Street in Victoria, we have a storyteller from Alberta who's coming, Pearl Ann Gooding. Now, Pearl Ann is a very, very experienced storyteller, and she has been awarded the Story Keeper Award for some years ago, which is the highest award that our national organization can give a storyteller. She's a lot of fun, and I was thinking what I would tell you about her, because I don't really know too much about the stories, but I can tell you that she is quite adventurous. She set up telling stories from a boxcar one time, and in a municipal graveyard. That carried on sometime until somebody objected to it, and there ended up to be a knockdown, drag-out fight about that, and it continued because people had a good time with her. She is, I think, a person who is, I'm going to say, she has a certain kindness about her that infuses all her stories, and a sense of fun as well. So in either place, you have to go in person. They're not going to be online. So that's April 26th and 27th. One end of the island to the other. You can pick your place. April 28th at 2 p.m. is the Duncan Showroom, and that's going to be a medley of stories. And I think that's Oh, I just mentioned that if you wanted to know anything locally or to get involved with anything that's going to happen, Lori is the person right there. Now you know her very well through her history. And so you have about 10 minutes, and the washrooms are down at the end of the building, and there's many things to explore in this place, and Longevity John can tell you about each and everything that's here. So we'll see you in a few minutes.
Now the days are long and the sun rolls high with the fireweed and the chamomile. So I took a job at the penny mill. When spring had come, I had my fill. When that spring had come, I had my fill. Slash and burn at harvest time. Plant the pine and spruce and lines. For this ain't no work of man, with just another grain of sand. Yeah, with just another grain of sand. Oh, 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 smoke cold burner rotting leaves feeds the hunger of the seed, where deep inside a memory waits for the day to cast its shade. A whistle blows right through my mind, standing in the hiring line. I pay my taxes when I can. I won't let them take my land. I was born on the Tejon Road. Stand the trees where the willow grows. See you in all of the faces of the men on White Avenue, and in that silly bar where I first served drinks to you. I hear you in all the footsteps of the men on 109. Such a lonely sound when I hang my head and cry. I will love you for now that you're gone. I need you more than ever. Still holding on. Still holding on. Still holding on. try to find peace and forgiveness. These days is too hard. May the Lord be my only witness. Yes, I love you forever. Now that you're gone, I need you more than ever. Still holding, still holding on, still holding to you. See you in all the faces of the men on White Avenue, in that silly bar I first met you.
again for the second part. You all know what I got in my hands, don't you? These are in nose flutes. You can buy them over at the Red Balloon. You can play music by blowing out your nose. Pretty nifty, eh? No one ever wants to borrow my instrument. And I'm sick and tired of people saying it's not music. It's all about the words. It's all about how you tell the story. And this one today has been really good so far. You all enjoying yourselves? For those that are tuned in, let's get Lee back to the stage again and start the second part.
Should have done this during the break. We were all sort of stunned. The story. Yeah, I wonder if you could find an instrument like that in Jules' store up there in Parksville. Got to be something to accompany what's going on, eh? All right. So for the second act opener is Catherine Sheehan. Now, Catherine is a member of the Victoria Storytellers Guild, although she began telling in Ottawa and has told in Nanaimo as well as with me in the pre-pandemic days. We were telling at the Talau over there, the seniors' home. That was a lot of fun. Now, I have heard this story before, and I'm very glad that you have a chance to hear it too. But before poor Catherine gets here, I better do something with this mic. Should be about right. Technology. I know how to open a book. That's about it.
Oh, did we? Oh, we stripped it.
No, I didn't, honest.
Okay, no, it's all right. Hold on. Oh, it happens all the time. Don't worry. We're good. That's why we got an extra.
I always heard that in groups, the members who play instruments always think that the singers will do stuff like that and trip over the lines on the stage and such. So, like to keep us all pathetic here. Ted, can we go just a little down? I'm afraid to do it myself. Because you're so big and strong and you know so much.
We can just do that. You just push it up and down like that. We don't even have to loosen anything.
Where
We
I
just
am,
muscle
so.
it to where we want.
As long as I don't have to touch it.
Thanks, Ted.
It'll be good.
Now we'll have a whole different type of uppity woman, of which I am not one, obviously. Okay.
I'm a little scared. How is this? Okay. Come on. Hello, all. Thanks for your patience. Technology, right? Yeah. Well, let's see. What was the story I was going to tell you today? Oh, yes. Okay. First, to say that, most of you here probably recognize my Newfoundland accent by now, but nothing much I can do about that. When I tell Newfoundland stories, it gets thicker, but I'm not telling one of those today. One of the groups of women I have found over the years that have much been maligned in stories and jokes and Lord knows what are the mothers-in-law. Now, I'm hoping this story might rectify that a little bit. It's a folk tale from Spain, so it's not about perhaps a real woman, but I think a woman that's very representative of uppity women everywhere. And this little story from Spain is called Don Demonio's Mother-in-Law, in which I will tell you that a very special son-in-law more than meets his match in his mother-in-law. So once upon a time, we don't get to use that very often, but I like it. Once upon a time, in a little village called La Zubia, in the province of Granada, there lived a widow woman who was known for her sharp tongue and her short temper. She was wizened and brown, her skin like a piece of esparto grass. And her tongue was as sharp as the butcher's knife on market day. From the hour when God hung out the daylight to the hour when he drew it in again, she was never still. Now, this old woman, Tia Pia, as she was known to her neighbours, was living with a daughter, her only daughter, who was very beautiful to look at. But the girl was so lazy that an earthquake couldn't move her. Panfila, the daughter's name, liked nothing better than to dress in her best gown of embroidered muslin and sit with folded hands in the window, waiting for somebody to come by and fall madly in love with her and marry her. It is true she was beautiful, but that's all she thought of. And it is true, too, that many a handsome young man went by and turned his head to look at her pretty face and her carefully dressed black hair. But as soon as Tia Pia put in an appearance, the young man was off like a shot, for even Panfila was not worth having such a woman as a mother-in-law. So day after day, Panfila sat with her folded hands in the window or on the balcony, waiting for her sweetheart to come. And day after day, Tia Pia scolded her for her laziness and idleness. Wielding her broom and raising a cloud of dust, she kept up a barrage at her daughter. "You are good for nothing. You are lazy. In my day." We all fear that from mothers, right? In my day, the girls did their share of work around the house. In my day, they didn't sit with folded hands waiting for a sweetheart to come. The one who comes for you will probably be a good for nothing. Swish, swish went her broom, and the clouds of dust rose as she talked. One day, Tia Pia asked her daughter for a little help in removing a vat of lye from the fire. Now, whether it was Tia Pia wasn't looking where she was quite where she was going that day, or whether it's because Panfila's thoughts were still on a handsome young man who had passed a window a few minutes before and had been scared away by the sight of her mother and her voice. Whether it was because of those things, the pot slipped slightly and some of the hot lye splashed onto Tia Pia's foot. Oh, you could hear her screeching 2 streets away. She railed at her daughter. "Oh, you good-for-nothing thing, worthless you are." And then she said it. She said, "May you marry the devil himself and have done with it." A few days later, a young stranger appeared in the village. He was tall and dark, very well dressed, courtly in manner. He soon made himself quite a friend to the young men in the town. They liked him. He seemed to know a thing or two, and nobody need spend his own money in the village inn when the stranger was by. He told them that he was from a distant country. Anyway, he was not afraid to spend his money. The young men liked him. The old men in the town, not so much. They eyed him shrewdly and they muttered among themselves. Old Tio Gill said, "I don't like the look of them. There's something strange about him. And I don't like the look in his eyes." And old Tio Blas said, "Yes, and I don't think he knows a sheep from a lamb. And have you noticed we haven't seen him in the church since he's been here? The other day I saw him hide himself when the priest went by. Something funny. And I don't like that cap he has on his head. It's a strange-looking cap, and he never seems to take it off." But despite the gossip and the chatter, the young stranger, who called himself Don Demonio, became a great favourite around the village. And it was not long before Panfila, sitting in her window, noticed him and began to have thoughts about him and looking at him the way she looked at the other handsome young men who passed. The stranger came to visit, and strange to say, he showed no fear at all of her mother, Tia Pia. In fact, he was as courtly to the mother as he was to the daughter, paying her compliments, laughing with her. And matters progressed. By Corpus Christi, it was all settled, and the wedding was planned. Now, Tia Pia was ugly, but she was also pretty shrewd. She had not forgotten what she had said to Panfilo when she spilled the lie. She was suspicious of the young stranger. It's true he was courtly and well-mannered, but she wasn't sure about that cap that he always wore. Who knew what might be beneath it? But on the day that before the wedding was planned, she called her daughter to her and said, "Now, my dear, take this advice. This is what you must do. This is what all brides must do. When you are first alone with your husband in the new house that you will have, be sure that everything is shut tight, all the windows and doors shut fast. Even cover the chimney. The only thing you must leave uncovered is the lock in the door. Now, be sure you do this, because this is what all brides must do to be sure that they rule in the house." So, meekly, Panfila agreed. And the wedding was celebrated with great feasting and rejoicing. Now, the house which Don Demonio had prepared for his new bride was a little way outside the village on the road leading to Granada. And when he took his bride to the house after the wedding, she made sure to do everything her mother had said. She covered the chimney. She made sure the windows and doors were all bolted. Oh, and another thing her mother had said to her, that when she had done all that, she must take a bough that had been blessed by the priest and must smack her husband with it. That is what all brides must do, as I said, to be sure that they rule. So Panfila had made sure everything was fast, took the key only out of the lock in the door, and then she advanced on her husband with the blessed branch that she'd got from the priest, blessed with holy water. And to her astonishment, he began to lose his courtly manner and cower in fear and try to escape as quickly as he can. Now suspicious, she advanced upon him with the branch, and he cowered and whimpered and begged, and at last. Another thing that had happened, which I forgot to tell you, is that when the bride and groom had gone into the house, nobody noticed Tia Pia coming along the side of the house with a small glass bottle in her hand. Remember that. So when he was finding that there was no way to get away from this, he was forced to resume his own form so that he could escape through the only way he could, which was the keyhole. And he resumed his form with horns and a black face, but no bigger than a man's little finger, and escaped that way. And just as he did, you know who was outside waiting? Tia Pia, with a bottle in her hand, and she caught him as he came through the keyhole and chuckled as she forced in the cork. This time, she said, even the devil was no match for a woman. So the very next morning, Tia Pia, leaving her daughter alternately weeping and preparing to sit and look out for another sweetheart who might be interested, Tia Pia made sure that the cork bottle was in her pocket, mounted on her donkey, and she set off for the Sierra Madre Mountains, to the one that was the highest mountain in Spain and covered with snow most of the year. It was a long way to go, but Tia Pia made the journey. And when she got to the top of that mountain, she took the bottle and she buried it deep in the snow, which must have been a strange atmosphere for His Satanic Majesty in the bottle. Then, making sure that it was well buried in the snow, she mounted her donkey and rode back to La Zubia. And 10 years passed. 10 years of peace and contentment and prosperity in the world. Wives were indulgent to their husbands. Husbands were kind and considerate to their wives. Little children were so good that they might have been angels already. The only people who were unhappy were the lawyers, because nobody was suing his neighbor. Nothing but peace and prosperity. One day, a young soldier of fortune, a young man called Ricardo, rode through the village. He stopped to ask his way of old Tia Pia, who still lived in the same house and still wielded her broom and her sharp tongue, although her daughter had since married and gone to live in Cordoba. Anyway, Ricardo and the old woman had a spirited conversation in which they found that they appreciated each other very, very much, appreciated each other's sense of humor. When she told him that the way he requested led through the mountains, he said, "Never mind, old woman, I will cross them even though I crack my head against heaven's arch." And she laughed merrily at that. They parted very good friends. Ricardo, on his horse, made his way up the long, winding mountain path and finally came to the top of the highest one. And then, it being a sunny day, he loosed his horse so to champ on some of the new grasses that were coming up, and he threw himself down in the shade of a tree. And as he did so, he noticed something gleaming in the sunlight at his feet. He went to poke in what was left of the snow and dug it out, and it was a little bottle. As Ricardo looked at it, he thought he saw something like beetle-like inside. "What?" he said. "What kind of insect is this?" And a little voice, cracked and withered, but nevertheless a voice, he heard say, "It is no insect, but an honorable devil who was imprisoned in this bottle by his mother-in-law. Let me out, good sir, and I will give you your heart's desire." "Oh," said Ricardo, "my heart's desire. As it happens, I do have a heart's desire." "Tell me about it," said the voice of the little devil. "Well," said Ricardo, "my heart is fixed upon the king's youngest daughter, the Princess Bianca, and I'm so longing to have her as mine." "Nothing easier," said the voice inside the bottle. "I can get her for you." "And how do you propose to do that?" said Ricardo. "Let me out," said the devil, beating his tiny fists against the glass bottle. "Let me out, and I will tell you exactly how I will do it." Ricardo was not a soldier of fortune for nothing. "Not so fast," he said. "Tell me first what it is you propose to do." And so the devil told him his idea, which is that he would bewitch the young princess with a strange disease which none could cure, and that the king, her father, would propose that whoever was successful in curing her would be the one to marry her. Ricardo didn't like the idea at first. He didn't want to inflict pain upon the princess, but the devil assured him it would only be temporary, and that it would be sure, if he came and said that he was a doctor, that he would be the one to cure and to win the princess. And so, instead of letting him out, though, quite yet, Ricardo put the bottle in his pocket and asked the devil how he came to be in there in the first place. Tell him the whole story about this Tia Pia who had put him there. And as he did, and they rode down the mountain, Ricardo laughed and laughed at the story the devil told him. Finally, they reached the city, and they heard the story from everyone who was in the streets, of the story of the Princess Bianca, who was lying on her bed with a strange illness, and that her father was calling doctors from every corner of the world to try to cure her. Ricardo went to the palace and entered it, and a fine figure of a man he made of himself. He wore a long black cape, a velvet cap on his curly hair, and he was handsome. And everybody was admiring him. And he asked for an interview with the king, told him that he was a doctor, and he was here sure that he would cure the Princess Bianca. And the king said, "I have now lost patience. Many have tried, and I tell you, I will let you try, but if you fail, I am building a gallows out in the courtyard, and that's where you will be if you fail to do what you can say." Well, this was a little more than Ricardo had bargained for, but he had faith in his compact with the devil, and assured the king that, yes, he would be the one to cure the princess. So he was led to her room, and the king and courtiers said they will withdraw and leave him there until the sun had set, and then the princess must be cured, or he would be the one who would be executed. Ricardo was left alone. He saw the young Princess Bianca lying on her bed, her face pale, her eyes closed. He put the devil under the pillow and called upon him to do what he had promised. There was no answer. For hours, Ricardo begged and pleaded and threatened, and only once did a little voice come from behind the pillow. "No hurry. Everything fine, nothing to worry about." At last, the sun was about to set. The king and the courtiers were outside. Ricardo thought and thought what he would do, and finally he had an idea. He went to the door and opened it just a crack. And he said to the king and the courtiers outside, "The princess is almost cured. There is just one thing that must be done. I require that you ask all the bells in all the churches of the city to be rung in celebration, for that will please her." The king agreed and gave the command. And suddenly, all the churches in the city pealed out with their bells in celebratory tones, and from behind the pillow, a tiny voice snarled, "What is that noise?" Ricardo stepped up to the bed. "Oh, that noise," he said, "that is the sound of all the bells in Cordoba ringing in celebration of the impending visit of Tia Pia, your mother-in-law." There was a shriek from behind the pillow, and suddenly a dark form darted to the window and ran out. And on the bed, the Princess Bianca's eyes opened to look in wonder and then with appreciation at the figure of Ricardo. And so all was well, and Ricardo won his heart's desire, the princess. Do you think that Tia Pia ever knew that she was the cause of the happiness of Ricardo and his princess? Perhaps not, but to the end of her own days, she chuckled every time she thought of how well she had done as Don Demonio's mother-in-law. Thank you. I think I fought with the mic a bit, but thank you. Thank you all.
On behalf of all of the Uppity women that Tia Pia represents. So our next teller is Pat Forrest. And Pat retired to Nanaimo from Calgary in 2011 with her husband Tom. It took her a while to discover storytelling, but she started telling stories at the Around Town Tellers in 2018, and now tells whenever she can. This seems a bit bragging to me, but I confirmed with her this is really true. In these last 2 weeks, she's told in person in Nanaimo, Montreal, Ottawa, Parksville, and now here she is with us in Duncan. I know, close to a world tour, seems to me. She loves to write and tell personal stories, but today she will be sharing a tale from the days of King Arthur. Her story is called Gawain and the Lady Ragnall, and is based on a story by Ethel Johnson Phelps in her book, The Maid of the North, Feminist Folk Tales from Around the World. A very promising title for Uppity women.
It's true, I was on a world tour. I was actually visiting my son in Montreal, who has a 4-month-old new baby. Long ago, in the days of King Arthur, the finest knight in all the land was the king's nephew, Gawain. He was the wisest, the bravest, the kindest, the most compassionate, and the most loyal to his king. One day, Arthur returned from a day's hunt, looking so pale and drawn that Gawain followed him at once to his chamber. "My king, what has happened?" Oh, Arthur sat down heavily. "I hardly know what to make of what went on in the forest. I was hunting the great white stag, and he escaped me, and so I was alone, far from the men. When a tall, powerful man approached me with his sword upraised as if he meant to strike me down. Then he stopped, laughed horribly, and said he would give me one chance to save my life." Who was this man? What is this chance he spoke of? He said his name was Sir Gromer, and he was avenging the loss of his northern lands. I must return in 1 year's time, unarmed, alone, with the answer to a question. What is it that women desire above all else? I'm sure it is a foolish riddle that no one knows the answer to. Nonsense, good uncle. There must be an answer, and I will help you. So for the next year, Gawain and Arthur rode from one corner of the kingdom to the next, asking everyone the question. As the day drew near, Arthur was worried. We have many answers, but not one of them has the ring of truth. The next day, Arthur rode off alone along a path that led to a grove of great oak trees. He was deeply engrossed in thought and barely looked up until suddenly, in the middle of the path, was a grotesque woman. I mean, she was almost as wide as she was high. Her face was a mottled green, and she had spikes of weed-like hair growing from her head. But her eyes captured Arthur's fearlessly. You are Arthur the King. In 2 days' time, you must meet Sir Gromer with the answer to a question. Yes, well, how do you know that? I am the Lady Ragnall. Sir Gromer is my step-brother. You do not have the answer to the question. Well, no, I have many answers. And he grabbed his reins and turned to leave, but he got caught again in those deep gray eyes. You do not have the right answer. But I know the answer to the question. Well, you do? Well, tell me, and I will give you a large bag of gold. I have no need of gold. Well, nonsense, my good woman. With gold, you can buy anything. What is it you want? Jewelry? Land? Just tell me, and I will give it to you. What I demand in return is that the knight Gawain become my husband. Oh, no, impossible! Gawain is his own man. He is not mine to give. I did not ask you to give him to me. If Gawain willingly agrees to marry me, I will give you the answer. No, impossible. I won't even mention this proposal to him. If you should change your mind, I will be here tomorrow. And she turned and disappeared into that great oak forest. Arthur rode home at a slow pace, so unsettled about the choices facing him. Gawain rode out to meet him, and again seeing him, he said, "My uncle, what has happened?" and followed him again into the chamber. Nothing, nothing. But Arthur could not keep silent long. Oh, the gross impudence of that woman. She's a monster, that's what she is, daring to give me terms. What woman? What terms do you speak of, uncle? At first, Arthur couldn't tell him the story, and then he broke down, looking into Gawain's smiling, expectant face, and told him the whole story, leaving out no details. The Lady Ragnall is Sir Gromer's stepsister. Yeah, I do believe she would know the answer to the question. How fortunate that I will be able to save your life. No, I won't have you sacrificing yourself for me. Nonsense. My good king, it is my choice and my decision. So the next day, Arthur and Gawain rode out to meet the loathsome lady. But not even meeting her face to face did Gawain back down from his decision. He too looked into those eyes, bowed and said, "If tomorrow your answer saves my king's life, we shall be wed." The next morning, Arthur and Gawain went part way with Arthur to meet Sir Gromer, and then went the rest of the way on his own, unarmed and as promised. The tall, powerful chieftain was waiting for him, his broad sword glinting in the sun. Arthur read off one answer and another and another. "No, you do not have the answer to the question." And he swung his sword as if to wait. "I have one more answer. What a woman desires above all else is the power of sovereignty, the right to exercise her own free will, make her own decisions." Oh, you did not get that answer on your own. That bold hussy, my stepsister Ragnall, gave it to you. I'm going to lop off her head. Oh, and he ran into the forest, a stream of hideous curses following behind him. Arthur and Gawain and the Lady Ragnall now rode back to the castle. That loathsome lady, she seemed in very good spirits. At the castle, Arthur turned to Gawain and said, "Perhaps a postponement. I mean, do you need to do it right away?" The lady's answers saved your life, good uncle. Would you have me? No, I know you cannot change your mind. The wedding took place in the abbey, and the strange wedding feast began in the great hall. There was some tittering and laughter as the people of the court put their faces began to see Gawain's new bride, but they were quickly silenced when that lady put her eyes on them. She remained in great spirits and of good appetite throughout the whole feast, and her new husband Gawain showered her with loving kindness and attention throughout the whole day. At last the feast ended, and they were alone in their wedding chamber. The Lady Ragnall again gazed at her new husband and said, "You have done your duty well. You've only shown me kindness and attention, no pity or disgust. Come now, we are wed. I want to be kissed." And Gawain went at once and kissed her. And when he stepped back, there in front of him was this slender young woman with a serene, smiling face. And he jumped back and said, "What manner of sorcery is this?" My step-brother, Sir Gromer, has always hated me. And he had a knowledge of sorcery from his mother. So he turned me into this shape, or that shape, and said that I must remain that way until the greatest night in Britain became my husband, willingly became my husband. But why did he hate you so much? He thought me bold and unwomanly because I defied him. I resisted his advances for my property and my person. But now the spell is broken. Only in part, my dearest Gawain, for you now have a choice to make. Would you prefer me in this shape at night and my formerly haggy parts in the court during the day, or this shape during the day and that grotesque woman at night? Gawain paused only a second and said, "My dearest Ragnall, I cannot make that decision. This is about you, whatever you decide, fair by day or fair by night. I will willingly agree." Oh, you have spoken well, my dear husband, for the final piece of the curse was that if after marriage to the finest knight in Britain, that he willingly gave me the power of choice to exercise my own free will, the spell would be broken forever. And thus, in wonder and in joy, began the marriage of Gawain and the Lady Ragnall. Thank you.
Well, isn't it great to be on part of Pat's world tour? And so our last teller for tonight is, or this afternoon, you can tell I do this in other places and other times, is Jennifer Ferris. And I'm looking forward to this because it's a story I have not heard yet myself. So come on down, Jennifer.
Well, Catherine's story put me in mind that I too am a mother-in-law. And my first daughter-in-law comes from China. And before she left her home to move to Canada, her mother took her aside and said, "You know, you're going a long way away." Wang Su, her name is Ma Wang Su. Wang Su, you're going a long way away. And if your mother-in-law is cruel to you, I will not be there to help. But I'll give you a piece of advice. Always say yes to your mother-in-law if you want a happy life. And it's worked out really well for me. What is that noise? What is that noise? Heads turned, necks craned. In the Cathedral of the Christ the Savior in Moscow on February the 21st, 2012. The solemnity of the Russian Orthodox liturgy was disturbed by a screaming and a yelling. Was that a song? They turned and looked, and coming from the entrance of the cathedral, up the aisle towards the altar were a group of young women dressed in brightly colored balaclavas and stunningly brightly colored leggings. And they were shouting. They were shouting a punk prayer, calling on the Virgin Mary to chase Putin away. These young women were members of Pussy Riot, a punk rock collective of activists who were using art and music to demonstrate against Vladimir Putin, president then and president now of Russia. and to call out the Russian Orthodox Church for their support of Putin and his thugs. Well, the young women, of course, were escorted to the door, and they were arrested. Masha Alikonova, who was interviewed on CBC Radio, said, "Our friends encouraged us to hide, to find some isolated village somewhere and stay away from the authorities. But I said no, and so did Nadia, my friend. This is our home. Russia is our home. We will not hide." 3 were arrested, 2 were charged. They were brought to trial on Forgiveness Sunday, a date in the Russian Orthodox calendar when Russians are encouraged to forgive each other. They were charged with hooliganism, found guilty, and sentenced to 2 years in a penal colony. These were 2 women who had young children of their own. "Oh, we have legacies in Russia," said Masha. "We have legacies from the Tsarist regime, from the Soviet regime. We have the Gulag." They were sentenced to 2 years in a Gulag in the Ural Mountains. Now, a penal colony is a strange little village, isolated, completely surrounded by a high fence or wall. The one that they spent 2 years in was divided into 2 zones. There was the living zone and the working zone. We were 100 women in one room, 1 toilet, no heat even in winter, no hot water, no proper food. When we woke, we were taken to the work zone. We labored 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. It was legalized slavery. While they were there, Masha and Nadia went on a hunger strike. When they were finished, they were weak, close to death. "I felt so weak," she said. It was my birthday. Oh, that place was so bleak, so cold. But she received a birthday telegram. A birthday telegram from Alexis Navalny. And she said that telegram saved my life. It meant so much to me. When they were released from the penal colony, they went back home to their families, and they were told, "Do not demonstrate. Do not join Pussy Riot." Do you think those women listened? No. They were arrested many times, 16 times. Masha was put under house arrest for a year and a half. They were on a federal wanted list. They had a travel ban. Their bank accounts were blocked. But that didn't stop them. During the Winter Olympics in Sochi, Masha and Nadia and Pussy Riot went to demonstrate. They were whipped and pepper sprayed by the security guards hired by the Olympics. She was there. She was there, although she was afraid. She was there at the airport when Alexis Navalny returned to Russia in 2021. "We were afraid for him," she said. "We were afraid for ourselves." But she appeared with Alexis at the same demonstration. She stood on the stage with him and spoke to his supporters, for he was the leader of the opposition. Eventually, she was charged, and she was threatened with the Gulag again. And so Masha and her family left Russia under a cloak of secrecy. When she was interviewed by Max Galloway on CBC Radio, he asked her, "Are you afraid?" "Oh," she said, "I don't have time to be afraid. I fear for the political prisoners in Russia. No one is safe. They can be killed at any time. It's a dangerous time to be an enemy of Putin. His power extends everywhere. Nobody is safe in Russia or beyond." We were naive about Alexis. We thought, here is a man famous around the world. Surely, he would be safe. how wrong we were. We've heard about many Uppity women today. Amelia, Lady Ragnall, Tia Peer, the mother and daughter who make vaginal lubrication in Victoria, Mary Jane, Mary Ann, and there are so many others that possibly you could name. But I am thinking of Masha and Nadia and Malala and Greta Thunberg and Yulia Navalny.
Thank you, Jennifer. And this is a time that I would thank everybody else, but I can't help myself. I have a story too. It's from Margaret Reed MacDonald, teeny tiny. There was in Syria a woman who was as wise as a Hoja, a teacher. And she knew that the queen of that country had a flock of turkeys that she was very, very proud of. I don't know, turkeys wouldn't be my first pick, but the queen loved them, and they were a special sort of breed. Well, the woman got an audience with the queen and told her that she had seen those turkeys, and they were a very special breed. They were so special that she knew that they could learn human speech. Not only that, they could learn, she could teach them, because she knew how, 7 languages. Well, the queen wasn't a fool. She thought this is probably not correct. This probably would not happen. But, you know, wouldn't it be wonderful if it did? If her turkeys could actually talk to her? So she agreed. And the woman said she only needed the turkeys for 30 days, but she would need a lot of supplies, and they'd have to be taken to her place. So she would need 100 bags of fine flour. She'd need 50 containers of dates. She would need 30 baskets of almonds. And she named every delicacy she could think of. The queen agreed to it all. So the turkeys were taken to the woman's place and all the supplies arrived. After everybody had gone, the woman just turned the turkeys out in her yard to fend for themselves, and she spent the next 30 days eating delicious pastries made of all of these ingredients that she'd gotten. Well, as it got to be the 30th day, the woman went to see the queen. The queen asked, well, how are things going? Oh, Your Majesty, those are wonderful turkeys. They have learned all of the 7 languages. There's no problem. The only problem is they keep shouting out, all of them, the same thing in all of their 7 languages. Well, what are they saying? The queen has a lover. The queen has a lover. Over and over and over. The queen turned pale. You execute those turkeys right now. Do not bring any of them back here. Yes, Your Majesty. So she went home. And once a week for 30 weeks, she had a turkey dinner. I know, I spoiled Jennifer's. Anyway, I wanted to, on your behalf, to thank the tellers. And of course, that's Jennifer times 2, and Lori, and Jewel, and Pat, our world traveler. And also, on all of our behalves, to thank Catherine. I'm sorry, Catherine. Yes, Catherine. I can't read my own notes. And to thank Ted and also Longevity John. As always, it's been a lot of fun, and I want to thank you all for coming. And without you, there's no storytelling, for sure. And I just hope to see you here on the 28th, and you in the virtual audience, virtually with us. And in the meantime, you either enjoy an encounter with an uppity woman or you experience being one. Even you, Ted.
chante ici, chante ici, chante ici et down, gone forth and cross the tide. Chante ici, chante ici, chante ici et down, gone forth and cross the tide. Chante ici, for the mile hath gone, and the welcome hath drawn you near. For the north that shone on the banks of Moher, oh, the night hath drawn you near. Chante ici, et down, gone forth and cross the tide. Chante ici, et down, gone forth and cross the tide. Chante ici, for the night hath gone and the welcome hath drawn you near. For the north light shone on the banks of Moher, for the night hath drawn you near. For the north light shone on the banks of Moher, for the night hath drawn you near. For the north light shone on the banks of Moher, chante ici hath drawn you near. Just